You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashill and Edge.
Hey, Loy. How you doing, sir?
Jack, what's up?
Well, I was watching the BLM Comedy Hour last week on BET, and they raised the question of why we didn't shoot down that balloon when it crossed over the length of the United States.
Huh, really?
And the answer was simple.
And what's that?
It was white.
Oh, man.
They're paranoid people there. They think in those terms. No, the question is, why didn't we shoot it down? We still don't know that. And in a sense, we're here today to address that issue and address comparable issues that flow from that.
Wait a minute. Do you think there's a possibility that we're being attacked by extraterrestrials?
I don't think so. The only extraterrestrial I know is occupying the White House right now. So now my theory, and it struck me as this: as soon as first of all, they floated, speaking of floating balloons, trial balloons, after the real balloon crosses, then we hear the story that there were 3 Trump balloons that floated unshot down. They were probably escapees from some parade, with big Trump, characters, which they did in parades, actually. But,
I love that Trump balloon. Yeah. He's like a baby with a diaper on.
Right.
It's a beautiful balloon.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Marshmallow Man in Ghostbusters. But then they moved away from that, and then apparently our military started shooting down other things, right?
Something they've never done before.
No.
It's never, ever in the history, well, as long as we've had flying forces.
But, the reason for this struck me is, and it sounds conspiratorial, but today it's hard to really distinguish the conspiracy from the reality. A conspiracy theorist is today, a prophet. He's someone who's going to tell you what's going to happen next week.
He's just somebody who wasn't glued to CNN and MSNBC all night.
That's right, where you're being denied the reality.
Yeah.
Where all reality strikes you as conspiracy.
Hey, that's a squirrel. How do you know that? It wasn't even on MSNBC. You're a prophet.
No, anyhow, my theory is I think it makes sense, and I think will prove to be true if we ever get the proof. We won't, because no one ever talks about these things. But is that having embarrassed themselves, the White House, by not shooting down the big white Chinese balloon, compensated by shooting down other things that were probably our own, to seem the unmanly act of not shooting down the original balloon was compensated for by the manly act of shooting down all these other objects, and of also distracting us from all the other cares in the world for the time being. So,
well, I found out that the third one they shot down was the red balloon that I was missing from my pair of Paul Parrott shoes that I got down on the plaza when I was 14.
I would not be a bit surprised,
I cried.
Once I have one balloon story of my own. I remember I went to Houston to visit relatives, and I took my daughter, who was then 4. We went to the zoo, and she got a really nice silvery kind of helium balloon. Right?
Oh, cool. Mylar.
Right, exactly. It was pretty impressive.
Nice.
So we're about ready to fly back, and she really wanted to take the balloon back to Kansas City. And I said, and I didn't want to say no, but I said, honey, they're not going to let you on the airplane with that. And I said, but if they do let you on the airplane, you can take it, right? So we get on the airplane, and they let her go through. This is pre-2001, So we're taking off, and we reach a certain altitude, and the balloon bursts, right? And it makes this enormous popping sound. And there are like 3 cardiac arrests on my half of the plane.
Now they don't allow those because of that kid.
They should not have allowed it then. I thought it was bad judgment on their part. But I was willing to advocate to their larger responsibility. But anyhow, those things we knew about. The cause, the effect. Someone's taking responsibility. that wasn't me. I was looking around like, hey, who did that?
Yeah.
Who's responsible for that?
First of all, you were hiding behind the innocent child with the balloon going, hey.
She's not mine.
What am I going to do? You think I'm a creep? Like I'm going to take a balloon from a kid? No, sir.
And yeah, we always look for excuses, and that makes perfect sense, right? Mm-hmm. So, for instance, when we shoot down things accidentally, and I believe it was 1988, the USS Vincennes, if I get my names right, shot down an Iranian Airbus over was I guess the Gulf of one of those various Gulfs,
Oman,
whatever they are. But there are 300 people on board. It was a passenger plane. They confused it for a descending Iranian jet when it was an ascending passenger Airbus, right? Mm. So historically, the Navy, when they shoot something down accidentally, it's run for cover and pass out medals, and just keep your mouth shut and hope things blow over. But since in 1988, Reagan was the president still, then the media were interested. Mm-hmm. And so finally it came out. It's an involved story, but the fellow who was in charge, the commander, was eventually dispatched to a school, some sort of naval school, as a teacher or trainer, right?
Good.
And this is what happens in the military. And think about the sort of the inequity of it. If, let's say, you're a police officer in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, and you accidentally shoot some dude who's resisting arrest, right? Kill him.
Yeah.
You go to prison. You're a Navy captain in the Gulf, and you shoot down a plane that kills 300 people. You get a teaching gig somewhere. It's not fair, but that's the way it works. But we have a history of not sharing information when we have we have strange objects. And I imagine, I don't know, do you believe that there are UFOs or strange extraterrestrial things happening in our lives, or are we just imagining all this?
Well, the first thing I think of anymore when I hear anything that doesn't have any proof is that it's just another manufactured lie caused to take attention off of one thing and put it on another.
Right.
It's all about media time, media share.
Yeah, right.
And especially when so much of the media is engaged in just propaganda, is not there to report any kind of news or to discover any truths.
Right.
And I think the UFO thing, which has been cycled before during times of turmoil where they're trying to, introduce new parameters into the culture, to normalize bizarre things and to take attention off. The early 60s is an example where there was so much behind-the-scenes turmoil going on in things like the church, the Vatican. The UN was coming into a very forceful leadership position with UNESCO, and that involved the church too. They wanted to emulate this eugenics thing, and that's what brought about the Vatican. You had two presidents talking about this mysterious hand in the background, this mysterious force. You had, Ike talking about the military-industrial complex. You had JFK with that chilling speech that was essentially about whatever this force is, this invisible hand, this dark,
And there was also legitimate tension in the air.
Yeah.
I mean, in 1962 was the last time Americans had real reason to fear nuclear annihilation.
That we know of.
That we know of. I mean, since then, no, the people actually felt it and feared it. After that, it's all been manufactured for the occasion.
Probably the last time it was spoken of.
Yeah.
Until recently, in the last few months.
Because of Ukraine.
Yeah.
But that's all talk. We know that's not going to happen.
Oh, but they're all talking about it. So when that's happening, it's not surprising to see the unidentified flying object,
Right.
GEO, come into the fore.
Right. Rather, you talk about the UFOs than talk about the FOs that are messing things up in Ukraine, where we're alleged to be winning and aren't. So yeah. So what's your take on the '60s? What manifestations did we see as like those of us who were around then?
Well, we can.
And my grandparents told me about that. I don't remember the '60s, but
Well, and you could go on and on about the changes. You talk about Cuba,
right.
and then the NASA deal, the war, the Cold War, that they were trying to gin up all these. There was an anti-war movement that was afoot.
Yes, beginning, sure.
And so what they were trying to do was get ahead of that. They had the MK Ultra working on the rock music. So popular culture was seeing a lot of change, and if you look at the television shows of the era, if you look back before 1961,
right.
I printed out the top TV shows, and this just illustrates it so plainly. These are the top shows, and in 60 to 61, and then how everything changed so dramatically. It was like you had Gunsmoke,
Right, they were all westerns. I mean,
Wagon Train,
Right.
how the Have Gun Will Travel,
Sure,
the Andy
westerns.
Griffith Show.
Yeah.
The things you notice, the Real McCoys. This is all rawhide. There's nothing extraterrestrial about any of this.
No, I mean,
this is
right. Andy Griffith is about as un-extraterrestrial as a show could
that's
get.
right.
Yeah, right.
And everything that you were seeing was a reflection of was not an intentional misrepresentation of Americana. It
Right.
was all there, and the families were intact.
Right.
And,
yeah, right. Oh, you had all those Green Acres and Petticoat Junction and shows that were grounded in westerns. At one point, there were like 26 westerns running simultaneously in the late 50s. 7 of the top 10 on a given week. Bonanza,
You still had things like then there were the pro law enforcement shows like the Untouchables and
the FBI, 77 Sunset Strip. Right.
Yep. And then you had shows where they brought comedy like Candid Camera.
Right.
Which doesn't have any kind of social. I mean, it was a study of social behavior, but
right.
And then things like Ed Sullivan Show and,
Sure.
and the Jackie Gleason, all this stuff, Red Skelton, and then all of a sudden, and going through the whole top 30, there's nothing in there except the Flintstones.
Right.
That was crazy.
Right.
That was not.
That was the only future. No, it wasn't future. Yeah, was that futuristic, or it was prehistoric, or whatever the opposite of futuristic is.
It was modern Stonic.
Yeah, modern. Stonic.
It was the modern Stonic
Right.
family.
Yabba dabba doo.
And then all of a sudden, all this turmoil in the background and crazy stuff happening, and sabers rattling and trying to gin up fear and oh, by the way, JFK made a hasty retreat from office. He didn't plan it; somebody else did. But
Yeah.
there was a lot of stuff that needed deflection.
It was a turbulent time.
So what do we get then? We get Bewitched.
Right.
I Dream
the
of
introduction
Jeannie.
of the quiet introduction of Satanism and whatnot
Satanism.
into our TV fare.
That's right.
Benignly inserted.
And I Dream of Jeannie
I
too.
Dream of Jeannie, yeah,
and she's
right.
got the military boyfriend with the secrets and all that.
Right.
But hey,
Don't pay attention.
Don't pay attention to that. And now instead of the FBI and the fugitive, now we got Get Smart.
Right.
We got Honey West and Man from U.N.C.L.E. and
Right.
things are getting, and Wild Wild West and everything's getting
I
high
Spy.
tech
Yeah.
and
Mission Impossible.
Cloak and Dagger. Like
Yeah.
that's a part of life. Just all that sneaky gun killy. They have a license to kill. It's cool.
Well, yeah. Then you also '60s was the introduction to the James Bond series, right? Yeah.
Which was the author was
Ian Fleming.
Ian Fleming was an MI or
Right.
what?
He was a legitimate spy.
A legitimate spy.
Yeah.
And then everything became silly, ridiculous, abstract stuff like Gilligan's Island, and it's stuff that could never, and Gilligan's Island had all that tech and military stuff, that worked into it. Superman, Batman, Addams Family, Ghost and Mrs. Muir. I mean, it is full of all this stuff.
Right. Monsters.
Yeah, Monsters, my favorite. Martian,
Right,
Mr. Ed, your favorite.
Yeah.
And My Mother, the Car,
Right.
Living Doll. Just everything is.
We had a breakdown of reality. I mean, you went from being real or or ordinary to the extraordinary.
That's right.
Yeah.
So get people into this, used to this kind of craziness, and then all the families break down. Then all the the single black mom Julia and the
mixed families,
and the
like
mixed
the Brady
families.
Bunch,
Yeah, that everything that wasn't a traditional family came out. And
Right.
now,
That's right. Yeah.
And now it's all.
Three's Company.
Yeah. Mary Tyler Moore, single, Murphy Brown.
Right. That girl.
And that girl and Lucy, who had I Love Lucy.
Right.
Well, she's now the Lucy Show.
Right, 'cause-
She's making it on her own with her gal pal Viv,
They dumped Desi.
Dumped Desi. They still had that great, what was that guy's name?
Fred Mertz?
No, that character that always.
Oh, Gordon.
Yeah.
What's his name? Gene Gordon? I forget his name. I've been to, by the way, the Lucille Ball Museum in Jamestown, New York. So
You're the only person I know who's ever admitted that.
But there are millions of us who've gone there.
I'm sure.
It's like the mecca of comedy. Actually, this is a little sad. It's a digression. Jamestown is this dying, fading, drug-riddled small town in rural New York, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's towns like it all over, unfortunately, the Northeast and Midwest. And but Lucille Ball is from there. So they got some major mega grant to build a National Comedy Hall of Fame. And I think it's designed by the same people who designed the Holocaust Center, which seems like a kind of a stretch, in Washington in terms of your what kind of mood will we have for, you're not going to enter like some boxcar, you have to, but the trick is comedy is the range of comedy. It's just like with the range of TV shows is so broad, and yet you have to appeal to a certain audience. A middle American mainstream audience. You can't have half the comedians who've ever existed. There's no Richard Pryor. There's no Red Fox. There's no George Carlin. Or some watered down version. So, anyhow,
that museum of the one in L.A. when I first went out there really confused me. I had no idea what it was. It's called the Museum of Tolerance. That's what it's called.
Right.
So you see these signs, and I didn't know it was a Holocaust museum. I just thought, what a ridiculous
title or theme.
That looks like a terribly boring museum.
Right. You can't even make fun of the exhibits.
No. And then I found out you can't. Really
not right.
can't.
You're not going to make fun of that.
No. That'll stop them.
So tell me, what's your thesis behind the emergence of all these surreal, sort of extraordinary themes right after a decade of normalcy and quietude? Right after a decade when, the average American woman was getting married at 20, having 4 children, living a nice suburban life, planning for the future, and then all of a sudden everything's thrown amiss, thrown out of whack, out of sync.
I think World War II changed up a lot of dynamics.
Right.
I think that starting the CIA after World War II and the UN and all of these things, they were all intended to kind of put a capo on the power that the U.S. had, because the U.S. had emerged as the victor of World War II. And it was kind of like that gilt-edged sort of, well, we can share. All of us, we all want what's right and what's good, and we really weren't that bad. We were good people.
Right.
And the UN will show. Our support of the UN and NATO and CETO and all that's right is going to show how well-meaning we were. And then, of course, the guys in the unit, the guys in the company and the CIA, they went nuts.
Right.
Wow! Look at the power we've got.
And without the accountability.
No accountability.
Right.
We're running the show, baby. So there was all that. What's our next deal? Where do we find our next power source, our next control center? And then the media, who had, by virtue of World War II, become a propaganda arm
Yes.
of the military-industrial complex eventually, was there to provide that support through the media brainwashing, the music and the sitcoms and all these and the newscasters. We've talked about this.
Right.
Everybody, Mr. What was his name? A newscaster from here, Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite, yeah, from up the road.
Right down the middle, that guy. Talking American.
You can trust him.
He was a new eugenicist going way back.
Right, and he was a hardcore lib, and he acknowledged as much later on in his career, and he wondered how he got away with it as long as he did.
He did.
Right.
And then, of course, he was replaced by Rather. But all these guys, all these guys were all on board with this stuff.
Well, speaking of that period, and speaking of Dan Rather and conspiracies, it was Dan Rather, reporting from Dallas, Texas, where he was in 1963, who spread the lasting bit of disinformation that Dallas school children, upon hearing about the death of JFK, stood and cheered. Remember that story?
Kind of rings a bell.
It was, widely believed, just like it was widely disseminated at the time that it was the John Birch Society or something.
Yeah.
Immediately
I
that
found
went
that
out.
poster that they had planted all over the place and put it on
But
Facebook.
it immediately went out that at the time that they wanted the world to think, before they got Lee Harvey Oswald and the narrative changed, that it was the right-wing conspiracy that killed JFK, because there was an advertisement someplace that said, JFK is not welcome here or something.
It was a flyer
Yeah.
that they put out anonymously the day before he arrived,
Right.
and it was all over Dallas.
Yeah.
And it said wanted for it. They made it look like the John Birchers and all these people had produced this and
Right.
put it out.
Well, you know what was going on at the time? I just finished this very good, again, a little bit of a digression, a biography of J. Edgar Hoover by a woman named Gage. I forget her first name. It's shockingly fair, and it's definitive. I mean, she spent years on this. It's very well done. But during that period, in fact, J. Edgar Hoover comes off better in this book than he does in the current memory. But he was constantly being pressured by the authorities, by people higher than he, to infiltrate various groups. And he was gung-ho on infiltrating communist groups, and they did a very good job of doing that, of busting up communist cells and whatnot through, and they had a whole bag of dirty tricks they used. But he resisted because the Eisenhower people wanted him to infiltrate the John Birch Society. And he drew the line. He said, no, these people aren't harmful. You may not agree with them, but they're ordinary Americans expressing everyday ideas. That did not, however, stop, say, the CIA from doing that.
Yeah.
Because from the beginning, they were hell-bent on bringing down the John Birch Society.
And that is because the John Birch Society's sole mission is to educate and inform and connect with people over the Constitution.
Right.
And that's what it is. Its stated goal is, and that's what, from everything I've ever seen, they've stuck to that. They are constitutionalists.
Yeah.
But
what they are not
the
are
CIA is unconstitutional.
But they have no history of violence. They have no history of radical underground groups, fomenting violence. And what's curious, too, is that Lee Harvey Oswald, took his first practice shot at General Edwin Walker, who was a Bircher, who had essentially been thrown out of the military for spreading Bircher material.
Which is the Constitution, which makes it so ironic.
Right. And then, I believe that he actually did shoot JFK. I know that makes me sound like a globalist simp, but it's he may have had someone whispering in his ear. But I think he was the trigger man. I think he was sufficiently wacko to have done both Walker and to do, JFK. But that was the spirit of that time. It was the spirit of the early 60s where lots of weird stuff was being injected into the culture. And so tell me then, we have this going on. How does this translate into UFO activity, or does it?
You could look at this several ways. I think there are several things. One of them is, we've talked about this before, going back to Genesis, where with Adam and Eve in the garden, and you're either a believer of the worldly things, or you're a believer in the holy.
Right.
Okay, and it's zero sum, zero base. Do you have infinite? Do you just trust that it's God and you follow that, or do you think, well, here we are, I'm a zero sum thinker, what we see is what we are, there's no God, that's ridiculous, or if there is, he doesn't care about this or this or this, right. We're God, we're running. Okay, so that split, if you think about it, another way to undermine Christian belief is to have guys with scientist shirts on and things going, it's very possible that we have unidentified flying objects from different cultures. That just kind of blows the whole Christian thing.
Well, it's like the Carl Sagan trip. There are billions and billions and billions of planets, and they would argue that with billions and billions, there's got to be millions and millions and millions of other civilizations, right? And I would say to that, and getting back to your zero-sum binary view of the world, and I believe in this, they'll say with 1 billion planets, the odds are that at least one of them would have advanced the civilization and have advanced the civilization, have life on it. And I would say, no, there's only two possibilities. And one is that there are billions and billions of planets, and they're mutating randomly, as ours is alleged to have done, which I don't buy, but they believe that. Or that the world was created for us, that we're the show. And all of that out there was designed for us. Now, so it's one choice or another. One choice is as unscientific as the other. They're both based on projections of faith or non-faith. But then the odds are slightly in our favor that I'm right, because either A, if it's A, the world is created for us, but B, even if it's not created specifically for us to be the only ones, there's a 1 in a billion chance that we're the only ones anyhow. So the odds are slightly in our favor that we're it, that we're the show, and that we bear the responsibility for making the best of the show that we've been given. And let's face it, born when you and I are, where we've been born, no one's had it better, No one, in a sense, has more responsibility to make it better than we do. And that's this podcast. And brought to us, of course, by Real Media Studios. Excellent. How's that for a
facility.
Segue in Oakland Park, Kansas?
You're better than Arthur Godfrey at that.
I go from billions and billions of planets. And all of those planets, there is no place quite like Real Media than here in Overland Park.
Well, so that you got to fill that. We talked about the magical thinking.
Yeah.
That is, humans are wired
right
to have this magical thinking. It's this desire to seek your creator.
Right.
And so if that is if that's spiritualism is rejected like that, and people start looking at I'm God, we can make transhuman, all this stuff, this crazy thought that where the magical thinking is not going down the right path.
Right.
It's going down the wrong path, and it's very easy for them to find confused people and to get them to captivate their magical thinking. And there's nothing easier that I know of than outer space aliens to do that.
Well, and
we've got proof.
And you also, during that period, especially right after World War, into the 50s and 60s, there was a rash of science fiction movies.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them dealt with that theme, that sort of the Frankenstein theme, is that, okay, we have this power that we've created. A lot of it was spawned by the atomic bomb and the fears that came with that. Are we controlling it as we ought to? Or are we failing to control it and going to suffer the consequences? And so it seemed to me that the science fiction of that period took two turns. One is a kind of left-wing science fiction.
Rod Serling did a lot of that.
He was sneaky left-winger. And then there's kind of right-wing science fiction. A good right-wing science fiction is this. the Thing, the original Thing. I don't know if you remember this. This alien creature lands in like Arctic or Antarctica and embeds itself in the ice. An American crew is sent up to deal with it. And actually, James Arness, a future Matt Dillon, plays the Thing. And it's like a giant carrot or something. It's like a vegetable, but it's about 8 feet tall. And finally, when they thaw it out and it emerges, the American captain is like real cool, good-looking guy, smart, get everything under control. And then there's the mad scientist who's a little bit European, and he's out there saying, no, we have to reason with the Thing.
Sounds to me like they sent the UN.
Right. Like a little blue peacekeeping bat.
Like they wanted to say, let's let the UN do it. They're fair. They're objective.
So they said the scientist says, no, I have to go out and talk to the Thing, and the Thing, of course, liquidates him immediately with extreme prejudice. And then the American guy said, we'll just kill his ass, we'll just shoot him. It's like that classic scene, actually, in first Indiana Jones movie. What was the name of the first Indiana Jones movie?
I can't remember.
Oh, it'll come to me. But where this guy is coming at him with all this swordplay, and then Harrison Ford looks around and says, oh, I've got a gun. Boom! He shoots him, So you have good American, old school gunsmoke technology versus, UN, UNESCO, nuclear Oppenheimer technology, right? That's the right-wing science fiction movie. In the left-wing science fiction movie, it was like something like The Day the Earth Stood Still. We have to apologize, to whoever is coming to Earth because we've all screwed it up, and they're going to tell us how we can have international peace, and all the nations have to come together, and we get scolded.
Yeah, by Star Trek had a lot of that.
Some guy with a Canadian accent. And speaking of Star Trek, you have two Canadian stars playing in the show, right? William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, both from Canada.
And I think both Jewish, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right, too.
And which is like Hogan's Heroes.
Yeah, right.
They were all Jewish. All the Nazis that played in that show were all Jewish.
I didn't know that, but I'm more worried about the Canadian threat. I mean, that's a constant threat, So
it is. They're always there threatening.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the science fiction films, the music thing. I don't even want to get into it that much, but I just want to lay this down for everybody who's watching this if they find it interesting, because there are books out on this. There's all kinds of it. I'm not going to say this is my rabbit hole. This is a rabbit hole I've seen all over the place for a long time, but it ties in with all this MK Ultra mind-altering stuff.
Yeah.
If you don't know about MK Ultra, look that up. Spend a little time with that. That was the CIA PSYOPs program that went on. A lot of people think it's going stronger than ever, but has been going on for a long time.
And it was legitimately a real thing. It's not merely
absolutely. It
a
involved
concoction
LSD.
Right.
Timothy Leary was one of the proponents of this, and he was. But you should look into this because the music of that era that was radically for the military-industrial complex to nip this anti-war movement at the bud. The best way for them to do that was to introduce sex, drugs, and rock and roll into this scene and get these people deflected, get them, neutralize them in that way.
Yeah.
So there's this cultural upheaval that happened in the early and mid 60s. There are people that are listed in all these books that were direct relatives of military or armaments or CIA.
Well, Jim Morrison's father was an admiral, you know.
That's right, Jim Morrison, and this is the Laurel Canyon scene.
Right.
You got to look into that. The Jim Morrison thing is a heavy bunch of stuff in there, but also you've got the Byrds, Zappa,
Yeah.
Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Graham Parsons, Neil Young, Poco, America. All of these groups just happen to have a strong relationship with someone who was involved in some way, shape, or form with this MK Ultra.
Well, that's I will say this to your point, and this is from real life experience. In the summer of '67 was summer of love. I found myself living. My roommates had become druggies, and they would have, people over. There's people in our place all the time. It was like a crash pad, and we were in Albany, New York. We were like on the Underground Railroad from Boston to San Francisco for wandering hippies. We were the stop in Albany. Obviously, not anyone sought it out as a destination. It wasn't the mecca of the movement. But there, any given day, there'd be a dozen people sitting around sharing a joint, right? So one day, this guy comes in from San Francisco. This is 1967. And he's wearing a Three Musketeer outfit. In 67, you could walk around in a Three Musketeer outfit. And people might look at you a little askance, but you would take that as a badge of pride because they just weren't sophisticated enough to know how cool you were, right? And so he sits down with this circle of pot smokers, and he says, "Let me tell you about the war, man." And the one guy turns to him and says, "Don't bum us out with that war stuff," right? They were zombified.
They bought into the MK Ultra.
Right. They didn't want to know about protesting anything. They just wanted to do their dope. And that's all they talked about was dope and rock music. And those were the two subjects.
That's right.
And sometimes I had my own.
What about sex? Didn't they talk about sex?
No.
Because that's supposed to be part of the
sex
deal.
was part of the it was like having sex was like eating a brownie. It had been reduced to this materialistic act that was heightened by the use of drugs. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it was, as a standalone, it wasn't worth talking about. I mean, romance was out. I mean, everybody didn't care about romance. That was gone. Things like sports, irrelevant, I played on a basketball team with them with a bunch of stoners, and they come to the game high. I said, "You can't do this. You're just destroying it." "Oh, man, we're so cool." That's not being cool. It was a total deconstruction of traditional American life.
That's right.
Being done on a local scale in every major metropolitan area. And now I don't know how directed it was, but whether it was directed or indirect, it was extremely successful.
Well, there's a lot of documentation out there now that is pointing out how directed it was.
Right.
And saying these things, these many coincidences don't happen. They don't come together like this.
Because all the things you were supposed to care about up until 1967, which was really the inflection point. I hate that word, but I use it here because I'm parodying it. And in fact, it won't even be used next year because it's such a stupid one-year word. You were not allowed to care about anymore. You were not allowed to care about whether Notre Dame won on Saturday.
Wasn't cool.
No, right. You weren't allowed to drink. Wasn't cool. You weren't allowed to have fraternity parties or to have dates. The idea of a date, where you'd actually go out with someone with the eventual goal of perhaps getting married, out. So all of these things were being broken down into their smaller pieces and then swept away into the dustbin of history. And if that were intentional, it was very successful.
You look at all these things and you can scratch the surface and you can see attacks on marriage, attacks on the white culture, attacks on prudishness and every aspect of Christian or constraint.
Yeah, church, gosh, yeah, sure. And that's when church attendance collapsed in the late 60s.
That's right.
Across all the mainstream churches, including...
And the Catholic in particular was that, I mean, and so you look at all those parallels with today. You've got a church that's in schism. Would you say so?
I would say it's heading there, sure. Yeah.
It's a serious civil war going on in the Catholic Church. And many other churches. You've got a lot of things being exposed that would be very dangerous to this group. All these parallels from the early mid-'60s to right now, and the UFOs are back. And so, long answer, but that's what I think.
What's interesting about that is the FBI's role in this. J.F. Edgar Hoover is an interesting fellow. And by the way, the author dismisses the cross-dressing stuff. You know, she says that didn't happen.
That relieves me because I don't have to have those pictures in my mind anymore.
And she traces it to its source. And it was a bogus story that a woman sold to some place about a year before she was actually arrested on a perjury charge for something serious.
Everybody wanted it to be true, so they ate it up.
And what happened is with Hoover, he was a career bureaucrat who, almost at every turn, tried to turn down the power they were thrusting on him. He didn't want to expand into all these areas, but he was also a social conservative. So up until the late 60s, he had been the most admired man in America. And the stuff that he used on the Contempro, the thing that he used on the radicals and on Black Panthers, he also used on the Ku Klux Klan very effectively. And, it's a bag of dirty tricks that they use to disrupt places.
So far, you're talking about 3 Democrat organizations.
Yeah, exactly, right. But the two, the Black Panthers and the Weathermen, Underground and such, had clout with the media, and the Klan didn't. So they just forgot that the exact same program was being used very successfully. And basically what he would do is, the FBI would do is sow dissension and discord and send rumors and plant letters and that sort of thing. But it was on the side of traditional values. He was a real traditionalist when it came to upholding church, state, community, family, even though he was not obviously a family man himself. But he was working against the culture. There were forces stronger than he was, not only taking down the culture, but taking down J. Edgar Hoover and killing his memory. And so now that he's thought of as a figure of fun and rebuked, and generally mocked and reviled, so it was some interesting forces at play there. And we don't know any more about them than we do about those stupid balloons floating over the United States, which is really at the heart of the tragedy right now. We don't know anything, and we don't expect anyone to tell us the truth.
That's true. That ship has sailed.
Yeah.
The trust is all gone.
And in the 60s, at least, people expected the truth. They didn't always get it, that's for sure. But they got it often enough to have faith in the institutions.
And how strange that it unwinds how it unwinds.
Right.
Well, who knows how quickly this trust will be spent.
Right.
It has been spent to a great extent now.
Right. And the question is, can we get it back? And
yeah. And you look back and you say, where did it all start to unravel, which is, I think, what we're doing right now.
Right. And we're deconstructing in the early 60s, which was where the birth control pill was introduced. And at the end of the decade, you have legalized abortion. And what's odd is that I have a book coming out in a few months. It's called Untenable. It's about the deconstruction of American cities in the 60s, part of the whole same thing.
Yeah.
And what's odd is that at least the anti-racist authors, there are people now making millions of dollars on this whole anti-racism charade. As Eric Hoffer said, all these good causes start out as movements, become businesses, end up as rackets. Anti-racism started out as a racket.
Yes.
And I identified several of these authors who pose as the model, the fake model, and that they attack as Leave It to Beaver, speaking of TV shows.
Yes.
And Leave It to Beaver, Beaver and I are the same age. The show came out in 1957. And it was the quintessential capturing of the ideal American family.
That's right.
Circa 1957. And it made sense even for people who didn't live in that world because the values were true.
Mm-hmm.
The social arrangement was true. The little, and the dramas were trivial and all, but they were true.
They were authentic.
Psychologically true. And so when the anti-racist authors attack that mindset, they attack the Leave It to Beaver show as though that were an utter fiction, an utter charade, and there were no black people and people of color, and the mom wasn't having affairs. Which reminds me, I think the most seditious movie made in recent years was the movie Pleasantville. And if you haven't seen that, you should. It's take another whole show just to get into. But it was the flipping of the beaver myth, and it was showing that.
And that's really what's behind all of these trends that came from behind in the music, in the film, in the television. All popular culture was toward destroying what was then perceived as American or mainstream or white or however you want to refer to it as.
Right. No, it's a complete subversion of virtually everything we had been led to believe in. And it wasn't fully successful in the United States. And there's great resistance, still is. Donald Trump is the essentially the embodiment of that resistance. But it's nonetheless, it's a ongoing battle. I mean, let's get down to cut it to the core. It's between Satan
That's right.
and the rest of us, the rest of us who choose to fight him. But anyhow, we'll have to resolve this in future episodes. It's a big battle, big story. And how fortunate those people out there to be able to tune into this show and get the sense of...
Well, here at Upstream,
right,
with Cashill and Edge.
Politics, leave that downstream. We go
there.
upstream. We're right to the source. I mean, right today was a totally a sort of a look at the source of these issues that came floating downstream in subsequent years. But what a thing. And also thanks to all the people here at Real Media in Overland Park, Kansas.
I love this place.
Yeah, no, they're great. And Carly, our producer.
She's the greatest.
And we'll see you again next week, Carly. Okay.
Bye.
Until then, we'll see you guys.